Hello, everyone. This is Khaled Saoudi from AUC Press marketing team, and I would like to welcome you all to our book discussion for our latest release, Documentary Filmmaking in the Middle East and North Africa, edited by Dr. Viola Shafik. The discussion will take around 70 minutes, and if you have any questions, you can write them down in the Q&A box below, and they will be raised at the end of the talk. Now, I will leave you with today's moderator, Professor Naomi Sakr.
Who's in a bit of a panic because I've lost my screen. I'm not quite sure. Can you see me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Well, I'll just introduce. I'll go ahead and introduce and try and get my screen back in a minute. Hello, and everyone, and thank you for coming. It's great to have you here. It's evening for you in Cairo, but I can see that we've got people joining from places where it's much earlier in the day. I'm Naomi Sakr. I'm Professor of Media Policy at the University of Westminster in the UK. And I want to thank Viola and AUC for inviting me to moderate this panel on such an amazing book. I think Khaled said something about the timing. It's possible we may go slightly over our allotted time, but if we get a good discussion, that's so much the better. So the format for the evening is that we have 4 short presentations of up to about 10 minutes each. We'll go one after the other, after which we plan to open up for questions. I'm going to introduce each contribution individually as we move from one to the other. And we'll be starting in just a minute with Viola, who is editor of the whole work. And then after that, we'll listen to the authors who are here on the panel in English alphabetical order of their surnames. Unfortunately, Donatella Della Rata was advertised as being part of the panel, but she's unable to join us. So we are lucky to have Peter Limbrick, then Hanan Tokan, then Stephanie van der Peer. But first, I want to give my sense of how we'll all benefit from tonight's panel. So this volume, Documentary Filmmaking in the Middle East and North Africa, is a phenomenal collection. And I can only imagine how much effort went into the work of coordination, both practically in sort of logistics and in terms of scholarship, based on Viola's very special combination of knowledge, experience, and contacts. And the book is 29 chapters, 30 if you include the introduction, divided very coherently into sections. Tonight, we'll get a compelling insight into what the book offers. We're going to have Viola to tell us about the whole compilation and about her own chapter. We have Stephanie, whose chapter features in section 1 on histories and structures. And we have Hanan, I hope, we'll check later, and Peter, whose contributions are in section 2 on the aesthetics and politics of representation. And between them, their contributions range across the whole region, from Algeria to Egypt, Palestine, and through the documentary film festivals that Stephanie will be talking about, to Qatar. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Viola Shafik. Viola is going to be very well known to anyone who has researched film in Arab countries. She is both a filmmaker and a scholar. She's taught in Egypt, Germany, and Switzerland. Her 2 best-known films are My Name Is Not Ali in 2011 and Arish Scent of Revolution in 2014. And she has been a consultant for a whole string of film festivals and screen ventures. Viola's groundbreaking book, Arab Cinema, History and Cultural Identity, is now in its 3rd edition. It was first published in 1998, revised and updated in 2007, and again, most recently in 2016. She has also written Popular Egyptian Cinema, Gender, Class and Nation, which came out with AUC Press in 2007. I am especially grateful to Viola because she wrote a wonderful chapter on Egyptian film for the Media and Culture section of the Routledge Handbook of Contemporary Egypt, which was released last year, for which I was one of several editors. Her chapter there, which I commend everyone to read if they get a chance, looked at Egyptian film collectives over time, comparing the timing and impetus of the collectives and the timing of the 25 January revolution. So today we're talking, our focus is on the documentary making, and Viola is going to introduce that volume. And we'll also speak to her own chapter about voiceover in Egyptian documentary under Nasser and Sadat. So I'm going to hand over to Viola, and Khalid, I'm going to exit Zoom now and re-enter in order to get my screen back properly, I hope. Okay, would you be able to let me in?
Yeah, I think you'll enter
Okay.
just fine on your own. Yeah.
No, I need to exit and re-enter because I've completely lost my Zoom screen.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I hand over to Viola now.
Okay. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you so much for this over generous introduction. I'm a bit shy when I hear such a big talk. So because I think cinema, or for me, Arab cinema is just a passion, and I follow my passion. That's it. Or let's say a sort of yeah, it's like a task, I guess. At some point, I felt it's a task that I have or I like to do. Yeah, and on the way, I met so many beautiful people, among them, of course, all these contributors about whom I'm going to talk in a minute. First of all, I have just to say how this book was conceived, because this book is actually part of a bigger project. I was lucky enough to have been funded by the DFG, the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, which is a research fund, a German research fund, and I had the opportunity through a good colleague, Kerstin Pinter, to be hosted at the University of Munich for that research project. And the whole research project was actually about in a way about documentary in the Mina region and in North Africa, but also about questions of dissidence, questions of revolutionary filmmaking. And when I started with that project in 2016, I found that I really don't know anything. So, and that is why the book at hand was actually conceived, first of all, as a sort of mapping of the field. And as at that point, Stephanie van der Peers, for example, book has not appeared yet. I mean, Stephanie, who is with us, wrote a book about 7 female documentary filmmakers from the region. That book had not appeared yet at the time. And also in 2015, Hanan al-Cinema by Laura Marks had just appeared, but it's more about experimental film. Of course, Peter Limbrick had also already written a study. Several other people, for example, also Ali Safi had already published something. But the work was scattered, and there was no major kind of book about that. And I felt really overwhelmed by the task. I could not write another Arab cinema book. So I invited all these people. So the issue is that it's not only about mapping the field, in the sense that trying also to see what could be out there, what didn't we talk about yet, what can be researched, but there was also the issue of diversity, that the book and the field allows a lot of different methodological approaches, theoretical approaches, but also of personal languages. And this is why, first of all, I organized in 2017 a symposium in Munich, to which some of the contributors could be invited or were able to come. And we had there, it served as a first think tank. We also had screenings at the Cinematic in Munich, and also had a possibility to meet for a first time. Yeah, and out of this symposium came the idea of the book, and then also it took us, unfortunately, quite a while to complete it, because it is a very ambitious project, as you can see, with 29 contributions, which means 29 actually authors also to deal with. That was a heavy task, not only for me, but also actually for AUC Press, and Corona came in between, so a lot of the work had to be postponed, and it took us quite a while, but I think what we have at hands now is worth it. On all levels. Also, I just need to add that in the meantime, also I have personally worked more on my topic, which is revolutionary documentary filmmaking since the Egyptian Revolution in 1919 until today, also with a focus on different Arab countries, but also on different issues. Among them were also the issue that Naomi pointed out, the question of collective filmmaking, for instance, which I regard as something very important in terms of for documentary filmmaking, and also for specific eras also in that field. Okay, so again, coming back to, I'm also actually not only grateful to Kerstin Pinter, I'm also grateful to the Goethe Institute in Cairo, who actually helped us bring over some of the researchers during the symposium. So I need actually also to thank them. Well, now I would like just very briefly, is it okay, Naomi, to name all the authors, because they are not, most of them could not be present today because they have a lot, some of them due to the time differences, other really because of the heavy workload that they have. So we had, the idea was, in terms of diversity, to bring together academics, but also film practitioners, artists, and some of the authors are also relatively new, like PhD students at the time when they wrote it, like Mathilde Ruxel, for instance, or Ahmad Izzo. But we have also a journalist like Ali Abdul Amir, and other younger academics like Dor Bowen, Hend Al-Awadi, Viviane Sanglier, Mohamed Rawanma, for instance. But we also have acclaimed professionals and academics with their own important and unique contributions to the fields of documentary studies and film studies in general. Just to mention the artist Rogayev Tukan and the curator Stefan Petke, the filmmakers Ali Sofi, Hadi Zakak, and Muhammad Sued, producers and researcher Ahmad Badjawi, distributor and researcher Irit Neithardt, curator and writer Olivier Hadouchi, authors and professors Alisa Libo, Aleya Younes, Donatella de la Ratta, Jamal Bahmed, Nouri Ghana, Kate Dickinson, Nadia Yaqub, Florence Martin, Shuhini Shahuzuri, and of course Ella Shohat. Also Hanan Tukan, Peter Limbrick, and Stephanie von der Pier, who hopefully will be all speaking tonight. Hanan didn't show up yet, so I guess we will not count on her today, unfortunately. Geographic, okay, and then also I need to point out that the book has also a geographic focus. it focused on the main film producing countries, except for Sudan and Jordan, for instance. We have, luckily, from the Gulf at least one contribution on Nujum al-Ghanem by Alaya Younes, but Sudan and Jordan at the time we could not find contributors, so these countries are more or less only mentioned in the introduction. Yeah. Also, we had some constraints because we could not get all the contributors whom we wanted, whom I asked for, because they were too busy. Otherwise, now let me just sketch out very quickly the three main thematic scopes or themes that Naomi has already mentioned. First of all, the book deals with histories and structures, which means individual national histories, but also with structures like structures of distribution, festivals, for instance, with aesthetics and politics of representation. For instance, with regard to the representation of Arab Jews or Mizrahim cinema in Israel, for instance, politics of representation also with regards to Amazigh filmmaking in Morocco, or, for example, also different aesthetics like the cinema of me during the times of revolution by Alisa Libo, or the issues of the videos taken by activists during the Syrian revolution about whom Donna was working. Then the third part are filmmakers and individual works. For example, we have filmmakers like Mai Masri and Jean Chamroun talked about, or also individual works like Bella Bess' work, or the work by when Shohini Chowdhury, for example, writes about slow cinema through the filmmaking of Abbas Fadl from Iraq. Only a few examples. There is a lot more out there, but you know, it will all get lost for later. It's better to check out the contributors list and topics of the different chapters. In terms of methodology, we have also very diverse approaches. For example, we had some like Ahmed Bijawi working or presenting a sort of historical chronology of filmmaking in Algeria about the war of liberation, or, for instance, the representation of Lebanon through different films, the history of Lebanon in Mohammed Suwaid's contribution. Or we had also different intertextual film analysis or archival research, for instance, like the research about an early Egyptian film magazine, Al-Suwag al-Mutaharrika, or, for example, Irit Neithart's representation of, through the GDR archive, of the cooperation between the PLO and the former Eastern German Republic. We have also works on different film aesthetics, and then articles on chapters influenced by post-colonial studies, up to very hybrid and subjective readings like the ones by Rogaib Toukan, or the ones influenced by cultural criticism, like in the case of Hanan Toukan, or reception theory and haptic cinema, like in the case of Stefan Petke, or, for example, even interviews, for instance, like Dor Bowen's interview with Akram Zatari, and so on and so on. Okay. Dear Naomi, shall I stop here for you to ask questions, or would you like me to add more? Now your mic.
You're still on mute.
Yes, there we go. Yeah. So Viola, I would love it. I mean, because we do have time, if you could just briefly, because the other people will speak, I guess, a bit about their chapters. So it would be lovely if you could just say a little bit about your voiceover chapter, because it is so fascinating, really. Just a couple of pointers, you know, to whet people's appetite.
Mr. Viola, you're on mute. It's okay.
Okay, that's
okay,
the common Zoom game, you know. I'm mute, I'm mute. Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry for that. Okay, my own chapter in the book is called From Poetics of Revolution to the Poetics of the Human Voice over in Egyptian Documentary. From 1956 to 82. And this chapter is dealing with a quite contested and hotly debated issue in film studies, namely the ideological implications of the voice-over or so-called voice of God in documentary filmmaking. So these ideological implications are analyzed with regards to state-funded anti-colonial documentary filmmaking of the Nasserist era. And basically, I dwell also on a controversy that occurred or started to develop in Egyptian documentary filmmaking during the Nasserist era and quite at its end, with Shadi Abdesalam's film unit, experimental film unit, which actually tried to do away with the voiceover and was trying to work really only on the image. As opposed to the work, a whole body of work that started, for instance, in 1956 with Nadim's film on the British and on the tripatriate attack on Egypt, on Port Said. And at the time, the voiceover was very important, and it was actually that it was based on the British film school of John Grierson. This is how the first filmmakers of the Nasserist era and post-colonial era, they were actually trained at the hands of British filmmakers, partly also at the Shell unit, and these filmmakers were using extensively the voiceover. And so for me was the question, is this voiceover actually, was this the representation of the ideology of the Nasserist era, and was it used in order actually as a sort of indoctrination? And was this the reason why later a younger generation, starting with the early 70s, that was already with the end actually of the Nasserist era, was so keen on doing away with the voiceover? So basically my chapter, and I will not speak more about that because I think, you know, you should have enough, you know, still suspense to read it. So it's basically about this controversy, but of course also I try to bring in the general debate in cinema studies, in international cinema studies, about the so-called voice of God, because it was again an ideologically charged debate internationally, and so I try to see in which respect these this applies to the Egyptian case, and in what respect actually the Egyptian case, interestingly, at some points departs from it, with, for instance, films that where Salah Jareen, for instance, was the poet of the revolution was using a voiceover, and here where suddenly the voiceover becomes something very personal. And this has been actually also disregarded in the Egyptian debate about, you know, the issues, the nuances of the voiceover during the Nasserist era. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope to open then the floor for the other speakers.
Thank you, Viola. It is absolutely fascinating. I'm really glad I persuaded you to talk about that, because it's those controversies and you know, sort of questions that have wider implications that are so important. I think it's important for everyone, for scholars and anyone reading about film, to see them the wider arguments, but also applied in a particular context. So now we come to Peter Limbrick, and he's professor and chair of film and digital media at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And his first book, it's interesting, you were just talking about the Suez and the invasion. His first book was called Making Settler Cinemas. So it looked at the material, published in 2010, it looked at the material and cultural relations of film in 3 locations embedded in British imperial history. So like a lot of the panelists today, Peter is also a curator. Because Donatella, she's unfortunately not here, Stephanie, yourself, and he brought the films of Mo'min Smehi to international audiences in the US and UK in 2013 and 14, including at the Tate here in London. Those films, part of the new cinema that took hold in the Maghreb in the 1970s, are considered in Peter's book, Arab Modernism as World Cinema, Films of Mo'min Smehi. His chapter in the present book is called Space of Dispossession, Experiments with the Real in Contemporary Algerian Cinema. Now, I know, Peter, you're not necessarily going to talk only specifically about your chapter, but I hand over to you and look forward to hearing you speak.
Thanks so much, Naomi, and congratulations to Viola and my co-contributors, and a big thanks to AUC Press. As Viola mentioned, this was such a multi-tentacled project over many, many years, which I think gives us some interesting things to think about. I don't want to say, like Viola, I don't want to say too much at this point about my chapter, maybe just to touch on a couple of things that I think have been of interest to me, and that I think in some ways anchor or extend some interests of other contributors in the book. One of them is the kind of transnational dimension of the films that I focus on. I mean, I make a general kind of comment that over the last 10 years, we could say, there have been some very interesting non-fiction films coming out of Algeria, which really kind of play with some of these borders between fiction and non-fiction, between what we think of as documentary cinema and what we might think of as a fiction cinema. And in many cases, those films have a relationship to other places as well. And I focus in particular on 2 films by filmmakers who have a relationship both with France and Algeria, Hassan Ferhani and Mohamed Wazin. And so in thinking about their 2 films, I'm very aware of that kind of transnational dimension, even though both of the films that I concentrate on, in Ferhani's case, the film A Roundabout in My Head, Fi Fassi Rond-Point, and in Mohamed Wazin's case, it's the film Samir in the Dust. Both of them are very, very much anchored in a place. Ferhani's film takes shape in a slaughterhouse, an abattoir in Algiers, and Wazin's film is in a village, his kind of family village, very close to the Moroccan border. So we have a really strong sense of Morocco and the border, which is often in the background background plane of the images, and a relationship to France, which one of the characters often kind of gestures to as being the place where the filmmaker has spent time. So these films are always evoking place and really both the possibility, but for many people, the impossibility of movement. Many of I call them characters in the films because they're developed like characters. Many of them are acutely aware of their impossibility of movement, right? Of the impossibility of leaving the place where they're in. And this constant kind of dance between, am I going to attempt harka, a migration by boat and all that entails, or am I simply going to stay here and be caught up in the politics and the difficulties and the dispossession of the moment? And these are very much films about a kind of a dispossession of these young male characters. So the other thing I think for me is really interesting about that, and it relates a little bit to the passage of this book, is the question of history. Viola has already spoken about how this book took shape over many years. Many of us first wrote these essays perhaps 5 years ago. And in that sense, they're a little kind of a time capsule. I managed to add a footnote somewhere during production to say, these films carry a sense of the Hirak, which had not yet broken out and taken place in Algeria. So I'm writing about these films, about these characters who talk about uprising, who talk about overthrowing something and finding a new politics. And it's uncanny to see those films now in the wake of what has happened since, just as it's a little uncanny to shepherd an essay through a collection, which in some ways is already out of date, right? Because we can never catch up to the moment in whatever we write and whatever we film and whatever we produce. We're always in this relationship of a time lag. And so part of what I think makes that interesting in these films, and part of what I try to draw out, is a sense that already, for example, in the 1970s, Nouri Bouzid, a filmmaker who was also a theorist and a scholar in a way, an historian of cinema, had already diagnosed this question in relation to the defeat of 1967. And he was thinking about films which evoked through their characters and through their mise en scène, this kind of sense of a pan-Arab defeat and the impossibility of escaping from that history. I see something similar going on in these films that I study, which have this sense of dispossession, of historical difficulty, of the kind of impossibility of moving forward. One of the characters in this very unusual titled film, a round point in my head, is saying, it's like I'm in a roundabout and I have 99 exits and I don't know which one to take. Right, this sense of being caught in history without an obvious entry point. And so this is something I think that's very key to many of the films that we study in the book, and is given this other uncanny kind of quality by the fact that we're often isolating a moment in time, even as history moves beyond us. And in thinking about, I think, all of the work of the region, we are caught very much in that dynamic of a very fast-moving history. The last thing I want to mention is the quality of experimentation, which I saw in the films that I address, and which led me in the end to thinking also about some fiction, so-called fiction films, particularly those by people like Tarek Taqiyya and Rabah Amirzaimesh, who also kind of play with this quality of documentary and fiction and the muddiness of that border, so that we often don't know whether we're watching real life characters, real life people in a drama, or whether we're watching something that is more like a documentary. And that sort of blurring of boundaries is very much key to some of the work, I think, that is the most exciting that is coming out, not just from Algeria, but of course, right across the region. And I think in many ways is theorized and written about and historicized in this volume. And I think it's why, as Viola said, there is so much benefit to be gained by reading, for example, filmmakers like Ali Asafi or Mohammed Swed, who we think of as filmmakers, and yet in their work have been documenting and producing history and theorizing the history of Lebanon, of the Civil War, of Les Années du Plan in Morocco. While we have archivists and curators who are perhaps trained as scholars, someone like Mathilde Huxel, who is now, so involved in curating and restoring and preserving the legacy of a filmmaker like Jocelyn Saab. So I think that crossing of boundaries, both in the contributors and in the work we study, is something that I think makes this book really exciting. And I'm really looking forward to reading the other 28 essays And I hope you'll find the same way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was really fascinating. I had read your chapter, but it's lovely to get it presented live, as it were, as well. Do we have Hanan? Is she with us? No, Hanan. Shame. Okay. But so we come to Stephanie. And I was going to say last, but absolutely no. Sorry, Viola, I want to say something.
But we have, I see that Aliyah Younes is there and Jamal Bahmet. So maybe later on we can convince them just, you know, to add a few sentences, and they may, you know, just send us a message if they are willing to do so without any pressure.
I have some ideas about things they might want to comment on, particularly like you yourself said, you know, the diversity of contributors, you know, across the different fields of practice, academe, journalism, and so on. And Peter alluded to that too, saying that the crossing of boundaries is very enriching. I'd love to hear a bit more, maybe from people in the audience or or yourselves even, to elaborate on that and to give particular examples of how that comes to be. So, okay, let's move now to Stephanie then. So I'd like to introduce Stephanie van der Peer. I hope I'm saying that right. She's Reader in Film Studies at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh, which she joined in 2019. She's researched and studied and researched at universities in the UK and Belgium. Gained her PhD from the University of Stirling in Scotland for research that formed the basis of her monograph, which Viola mentioned earlier, about women documentaries, women Arab documentary makers, and it's called Negotiating Dissidents, published in 2017. And at the same time, I think almost the same year, she produced a collection called Animation in the Middle East, Practice and Aesthetics from Baghdad to Casablanca, which I know because of a contributor to that volume, who also contributed to one of mine. And that book won the award for the best edited book from the British Association of Film, Television and Screen Studies. So Stephanie's also an expert on film festivals, having worked with several as coordinator, programmer, curator and board member. And her chapter in the book is about Arab documentary landscapes, transnational flow of solidarity at festivals. And I love that word solidarity because we don't hear it nearly enough. And so I'd like to hand over to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi, and everybody else as well in organizing this and for giving me the opportunity to be here. I am going to respond actually to something that Peter said about borders being difficult to cross in the films and the inability to move very often being a topic of discussion in a lot of political documentaries, and then contrasting that perhaps with the way in which films themselves cross borders in their transnational sort of circuits of film festivals, but also something about the temporality of these film festivals themselves, because as Peter and Viola both said, the book is a time capsule in itself. And so some of the festivals, in fact, the majority of the festivals that I have written about in this chapter are not exist. They don't exist anymore. They don't run anymore. And again, also like Peter, I was able to address this in a few extra sentences or footnotes in one of the stages of the editing. But it says something about how a lot of us, especially those of us working in festivals, on the one hand, work with something that we think is timeless, which is the importance of showing films and sharing them and discussing them, but also the temporality of how they circulate on specific networks, and how these festivals are full of workers that have precarious positions. And so perhaps my word choice of solidarity shouldn't only relate to the films and the way that the festivals show these films and the way they create moments in which audiences share a sense of relationship to these films, but also solidarity with the festival people, the curators, the programmers, and those who organize the festivals. So perhaps that word is even more important than we might think, and should definitely be used much more. Viola gave me really great feedback on the first version of my chapter, in which she encouraged me to look at different theories than I'd been used to looking at. The main person that she suggested to me was Appadurai, and it really opened the world for me in terms of the conceptualization of solidarity between the audience and a film or a cultural product. So that's what I ended up using. And so it also says something about the process that a book goes through in the editorial stages, and the sort of internal feedback that you get in how a book is envisaged by the editor versus how a chapter takes shape in the author's hands. The festivals that I have written about, there's 6 of them in this chapter, are Dog's Box from Syria, Doc at Tunisia, FIDA Doc in Agadir in Morocco, Docu-Days in Beirut, Lebanon, and the Ismailia Documentary Festival in Egypt, and the Al Jazeera International Documentary Festival in Doha. As I said, actually most of these documentary festivals don't run anymore, for many various reasons. But in the chapter, I try to create a sense of a network between these festivals in terms of who attends them, which films are screened at these festivals, and the role that they play in bringing attention to the importance of political documentaries from the MENA region. I also wanted to engage a little bit with my own position in terms of being a curator of Arab film in Europe, mainly, and being very aware of the fact that I take up a space as a curator, as a white curator of Arab film, and engaging with that kind of challenged my vision of what it is to be a curator and to run a film festival as somebody in a specific location. I do most of my work in Scotland and in Belgium, and what that means to my own sort of impact on what I program and the way that I see documentary festivals running. That's why I've also included a few reflections on festivals like ITFA, the big documentary festival in Amsterdam, and a little bit on Doc CPF in Copenhagen, and the Sheffield Documentary Festival. So those 3 festivals are seen as like the biggest ones on the network in the globe, and reflecting on their programming and how that has developed in a direction of more inclusive programming has influenced my own approach to my own curation and my curatorial process, which in turn has now impacted the program that I'm currently curating with the Vienna Film Festival, in which we look at documentaries from the Arab world made by women through history. So it's quite an extensive program that will run in Vienna at the Film Museum in the spring. So this chapter has been a way for me to reflect on my practice and my thinking around being a curator, but has also fed into the way that I am doing things with the Vienna Film Museum at the moment. So thanks again for this opportunity to write it, Viola, and to be part of this amazing project. And very nice to see so many friends among the attendees, of course, as well. So thanks very much.
Thank
Thank
you, Stephanie. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Naomi, I just wanted also to add what we said in the beginning when we were still off camera, that we actually met also Stephanie and you. We met thanks to you, Naomi, because we were invited to your
Conference.
To a conference, exactly.
Yes,
that was
held in the grand name, but it was
in London in 2014. So actually, you are also one of the, one of the inspirational sources actually for this work. And
well, it's all about networks, because when Stephanie was mentioning IDFA, Orwan Narabia is the artistic director there, which is like, sort of an amazing sort of outward spread. And in Germany as well, I mean, the creativity that has been, I mean, yes, people have had to leave the region, but I think in Germany, they've been able to continue work. And it's a shame we didn't have, talking about festivals, Hanan's contribution is inspired by the London Palestine Film Festival and the curation that went on there that gave her the idea to actually write the chapter the way she did. I think I've understood from the chat that's been going on that we will be lucky enough to have Alia Yunus, who was also at that conference, if I recall correctly. Yes. And Alia would talk a little bit about festivals, maybe, because I know that's one of her specialities, but also about Najum al-Ghanem. It's very nice of you to speak spontaneously, Alia. Thank you very much. Look forward to hearing. I'll hand over.
You're on mute.
Okay, yeah, I haven't done the Zoom in a while now. It's nice to see those of you that I know, and I remember that conference very well. Yeah, it seems like it was yesterday, but I realized it was a long time ago. So I guess I would just follow up, because I know Stephanie was talking a lot about festivals that are no longer. And my chapter is about Najum al-Ghanem, and she's from Dubai. And she's really the only documentary filmmaker in the Gulf of any significance of Gulf citizens. There's others that are not Gulf citizens, but they don't work on the Gulf in their films. So I think that she's very unique because she's had nobody's decided to join her in this. She's not a young filmmaker, and she's been doing it for a very long time, and yet nobody else has joined her. It's a format that just in the Gulf doesn't seem to take off. And I don't think it's just about issues of freedom. I think it's about audiences not having any appetite for it either. So there was in Dubai Film Festival and the Abu Dhabi Film Festival and different versions of the Qatari film festivals, and most of them are gone. And I think it's really, she carries on making films, and those festivals opened a window for documentary film, but not from the Gulf. And they didn't foster as much documentary as they did narrative film. So I actually did my dissertation on the Gulf and cinema, but I didn't want to write an academic paper for this book. I felt like because I'm also make films, and I thought that there's like these chapters are also written in styles that you could also call documentary. And I wanted to go with a more journalistic documentary style for this. And I just wanted her to explain the situation in the Gulf and why there's no documentary filmmaking happening from her point of view, without me having to convey her point of view in any other way than just using her words. So that's why I chose that style. And I think so much has been made about the Gulf being an epicenter of filmmaking now for the Middle East. And I think that's true in terms of television. Netflix for sure is loving it here. But I don't think it's really created a creative community. I at all. That it's created a factory more than a creative community. So I think she's really remarkable also, because I know her films are very hard to access, but they're very worth accessing. And her theme is heritage always, and the loss of heritage in the Gulf, but not the heritage of camels, but this kind of deeper heritage that's been completely obliterated by modernity. So I think the Gulf is a very interesting place in its absences. And I thought I would just say that about it. And by the fact that it's the only chapter in the book about the Gulf in documentary. I would like to say that if anyone in the world is interested in documentary in the Gulf and colonialism, where there is a real bunch of material about the Gulf and documentary, is the oil companies, Aramco World and BP, and all have incredible archives of films. They're Orientalist in their perspective, but at least they're the only documentaries that have really been made that carry a visual memory of the place. So yeah, I don't know if I wanted to add anything more, except that I think this is a really important book because it's a genre that we don't pay very much attention in this part of the world. And the short documentary isn't being discussed here, but that's for me where I do see creativity happening in the Gulf. And we don't call it a short documentary, we call it a YouTube video, but it's where there's a lot of really bold stuff being made, actually. That's just my thoughts for the evening. It's pretty late in Abu Dhabi, so I don't know.
Thank you so much, Talia. That was really fascinating, and it's lovely to have your contribution. I'm wondering whether Jamal Bahmad is interested in offering any comments. I think he's in the audience, but I'll give him a chance. I'm not. I mean, what you said about what Alia said about you know, possibilities for future research and future focus on documentary makes me wonder, because Viola started off right at the beginning saying this book is part of a bigger project. So I was wondering if Viola could maybe tell us a little bit more, like to set out the book, if it is in a context of a bigger project, what does that involve? Is it a bigger project of Viola's or a bigger filmmaking project generally? Viola, could you fill us in?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I liked very much what Dalia said in terms also of, because she did already point out again to fields of research that are absolutely blank, you know, where we could, if we speak about a general project, there is a general project. I mean, we could, I think, still need, you know, the same 29 authors, multiply it, and then, you know, do another 5 years of research, and then, you know, maybe we would come up with a bit more of a complete picture. And still there is so much to be done in all directions, you know. Well, name it. No, the bigger project the overall project, my research project was was on dissident subversion and revolutionary documentary filmmaking in the Mina region, and I took that further, and I have a monograph coming out as far as it is scheduled now in February next year. It is about the aesthetics of revolutionary documentary filmmaking in the Mina region. But this is very specific. Of course, it covers quite a lot of the individuality and also also experimental parts of the region. I mean, it is also a diverse, a research of diversity, if you want to say so, on all levels. in terms of aesthetics expression, but also historically in terms of region, ethnicity, cultures, because revolutionary filmmaking is often about, you know, expressing what has been suppressed or dismissed or etc. And it is about creating new film languages. It is about being also creating forms for spaces of dissidence, etc. It is about new forms of filmmakings and practices also. So that's quite an ambitious project, I admit. I mean, and still here again, you will find lots of questions and topics that can be pursued later by others. By other researchers. Yeah, so that's so far about my own project, but I have a new one also on which hopefully will find funding about self-ethnography, about the early ethnographic films that were inspired in a way by the way of European ethnographic films, but were made by local filmmakers. And here, this could be a general exploration also. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, we should have given Peter a chance to, well, now he's gone, sorry.
I know, I think we agreed earlier on that we weren't going to, that we were going to let him
disappear, but we wanted maybe to see whether there is a question for him, but well, okay.
Yes. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A, Khalid. Have I missed something so far?
We have questions in the Q&A and we have questions in the chat.
Okay, so do you want to?
Yes, sure.
I'm not seeing, the questions are not coming. I'm not seeing.
It's okay. I'll read them to you. It's okay.
Okay.
The first question is, what are some of the big topics that documentary filmmakers are currently making in the Mina region?
Okay, well, that's that's a question for everybody who's left on the panel, I guess. Shall we start? Viola, do you want to have a go at that?
My question would be actually to the visitor who is asking what sort of documentary does he mean? Is it, I mean, is the question related to films that are screened on festivals, or is he speaking about, or she speaking about films that are on Netflix from the region or made by the region, or what exactly, you know, what sort of films are we talking about? Because here again we have a huge variety. Or is it these, or are we speaking about the films Alea was just mentioning, the ones which are made, you know, small initiatives which are on YouTube? I don't know. So I think we have lots of different topics. I can only speak from my own view. What I can see is, I find interesting that we have since the I mean, it's always misleading to say that 2011, the uprisings, or in general, the uprisings were a point of start for documentary or a point of change, because actually the technique is very important. Digital. The so-called digital turn is very important, and that started already in the 90s. And so here again, we have a kind of possibility for non-state funded, for non-NGO funded films, but more for privately funded films to be made. And this was a big opportunity for individual filmmakers, for a more subjective form of filmmaking, where we have a first-person narrative, for example. Alisa Libo, for instance, has a chapter in the book about this particular issue of the first-person documentary filmmaking. So, but again, this is one aspect, yeah. generally we have a huge diversity of themes. We have themes like, you know, in Morocco, like House in the Fields, for example, where we have the description of two young Amazigh girls, you know, and their life, their personal life. It's a very direct cinema film. Or we have films that are described by Jamal Bahmed, for instance, Nadir Bourmouch's work with the Amazigh community of Emider and their fight against the silver mine. And we have films about which we do not speak about in our book, for instance, about sports, women and sports in the Arab world. This is kind of a huge wave now. Lift Like a Girl, for instance, or you know, exactly, or Speed Sisters, or quite a number of films, you know, on women and soccer, like from Libya and Sudan and so on. We have revolutionary films like films from collectives, a huge number also on music, like from Sudan, for instance. I mean, there is a huge variety all over the field. And of course, films that are about politics, a lot of films about politics, which is natural because, I mean, look at Lebanon, look at all the events. I mean, since during the last 20 years, we have a huge wave of different uprising, protests, and so on. Immigration is, of course, always a topic, etc. So name it.
So I'm not muted, am I? No, I mean, the person who asked that question is extremely privileged. They just got the most coherent, summarized, amazing little lecture that answered your question. It's lucky this is being recorded, so it's there for the record. Khaled, I mean, we're going to be up against time constraints shortly, so maybe we take another couple of questions. Let's just, if Khaled, if you could just read them out, sorry.
So we have another question. Do you think Egypt is suitable for making documentaries in the film industry?
Oh gosh, that's quite a tricky question to answer, I guess.
I think.
I'm not sure anybody here is, I mean, obviously Viola is more than qualified to comment, but I mean, I just...
you know, I mean, I'm anyways not so much for industrialization because it can kill creativity, but this is a very, you know, now a very general answer. I have here a question. I'm sorry to just not, I mean, please forgive us, but because really we have time constraints and we want to widen the scope. And I can see here that we have a lot of Egyptian also listeners, and I know it's always interesting for Egyptians to speak about Egypt, and AUC Press is in Cairo. But please allow me here, for instance, there is an interesting question to Alaya Yunus, for instance, that says, thank you for your input. Are the documentary films done by oil companies in the Gulf available to the public? I think this is an interesting issue in terms of availability and archives and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Technically, the British Petroleum Company, or BP, still has them in an archive. And with reluctance, you can get access to them. Some of the colonial era films made in the Gulf are on open access platforms, but Aramco Worlds are available through Aramco World, but you have to go through hoops to see them. But yeah, that's the big problem. A lot of the archives, you know, thank God for the archives that they exist. And so some stuff is being preserved, but they're not easy to access. A lot of them have found their way onto YouTube though, you know, that you can find them. For example, Farewell Arabia is probably the most famous one that's easily accessible on YouTube. And that's about Abu Dhabi and Sheikh Zayed and his rise to power. And it was done by an Australian, American, and British consortium of media companies funded by an oil company.
Thank
So
you. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Aramco, but have you worked with Aramco material at all? And you yourself have encountered the obstacles to actually accessing?
I wish that is any chance that Firat Orak is on this call. There's a book coming out by him. He's at Georgetown in Qatar, just about the oil documentaries. And it's going to be great, I really think. And I've read bits of it. Me personally, no, I have not worked with, I have worked for Aramco. So I know how to access them because of that. But no, as for research, I haven't tried to access them. But there are corporate ways to access them. Yeah.
Thank you for telling us about the book. You heard it here first. So that's really good. Sorry, Khalid, I'm very nervous of trying to read the questions in case
it's okay.
earlier does the same thing.
It's totally fine. I can read them. We have one more question.
Which is not about Egypt, because I think,
no,
I mean, I know that, as Viola said, we're in AUC and everything, but the thing is, it would be possible to like do the whole evening on Egypt, maybe. So let's pick something that's more general.
Yeah, it's a general question. What are the obstacles you face while filming documentaries, Dr. Viola?
Me? Well, generally, it's always I'm the obstacle. It's me. I'm the biggest obstacle, and I think every filmmaker can also, you know, I mean, understand me when I'm saying this. Because yeah, filmmaking is you have a topic maybe or something, but always you need to see where your own actually motivation comes from, and then it's a creative process like everything. And now yeah, very often you have blockades, or you know, you're not clear about your real motivation, and then you know the whole topic gets spoiled. And so documentaries for me are a very, very long process, because it's a process not only of investigating or researching the topic itself, it's also researching your own motivations about why are you doing it, and how is the best way to express it, but not only just the best way for yourself, but also for others, but at the same time, not just to cater to certain expectations that might not do good to the creative process, or might even not serve the film well. So it's a constant dialogue, let's say, and debate with yourself and with others about how to make a film. And then, you know, I consider then the rest, I mean, like whatever money, and also licenses, whatever. I think these are problems that are very crucial, but in the end, I think one of the main issues is sometimes you can just grab I mean, if you really want to make a film today, you can really grab a phone and start making one. So, but here, first thing is, what is it about, and how can I express myself to myself and others? Yeah, so that's
I think that comes back to one of the questions about that was brought up by people, their contributors on the panel, about the nature of the book. I mean, the thing is, you know, we have this term work in progress. You know, when is something finished? And when can you let it go? I mean, the fact that the book is published, is finished, exists. I mean, and this is a question for all for everybody, for Alia, for Stephanie, and Viola. Like, how do you feel frustrated that you can't add to your chapter, or do you just feel like you want to sort of like move on and slightly change the focus of the research, perhaps? Let me ask Stephanie that question. I mean, the fact that that you've written about documentary festivals, which are no longer with us. I mean, that's like, so you've pinpointed a moment in time. I mean, CPH Doc still goes, I think, but and the international festivals. But like, do you feel that you managed to sort of capture a moment in time, or do you feel frustrated that that you had to sort of, you know, that things have changed since you wrote that chapter?
I am not frustrated. I'm not
Okay.
easily frustrated. I think it is a moment in time, absolutely. But I think the main thing for me is what you pointed out, Naomi, about how documentary festivals, and the ones that I talk about, are relatively small in size and are different from the festivals that we usually hear about. They do manage to do something to create a community of people watching a film with intent, with an ideological, no, not ideological, an idealism.
Yes,
A perspective.
You make that point in the chapter very clearly.
Yeah, a perspective of idealism. And I think just sort of thinking about things like solidarity and idealism and how those fleeting feelings can become a little bit more concrete, even if they are fleeting. I don't know if I'm making sense here, because it's very paradoxical. But I suppose I'm an optimist in the sense that even if the festivals don't run anymore, they've created something in an audience and in an experience of film that I think other festivals can continue to work with. And filmmakers or creative people in the industry can continue to strive towards.
The reason I asked the question is because when you edit like this volume, something that has, where people who are used to writing in a timely fashion, you know, journalists and so on, for whom what happened, you know, if it happened yesterday, it's almost too late. That can be finding the right voice for something that is going to be, you know, frozen in time, as it were. It can be quite challenging. We've reached the allotted time. There was one question that Khalid started writing to me, but it was a bit complicated, about perception and perspective. Would you mind reading it out, Khalid, and we see if anybody wants to try and answer?
Yeah,
And that
sure.
will be the last one.
Sure. Do you consider projected manifestations of the theory of perception on the concept of consciousness-based beauty while making a movie?
That's much too abstract and philosophical for the likes of me. I don't know if Ali or anybody would like to have a go at that. I'd probably need to say no. It's quite a challenging question, I think.
Consciousness-based beauty, concept of consciousness-based beauty. I don't know what it means actually. Is that the cosmetics industry, or what are we talking about in terms of perception theory? I mean, the films we were dealing with in the book, I mean, there are, you know, like there is a whole field, of course, of filmmaking that actually is based on research of target audiences. These are promotional films, etc. And with these, we actually do not deal at all in our book. So yeah, and now also the question is actually, while making a movie, that means, you know, it's addressing us as movie as filmmakers. That would be Alea and me, but you know, I'm not that interested in that question, so I cannot answer. And I don't know about Alea. I just wanted actually just to add something to Alea's point about the oil companies. I just wanted also to add that in our research, actually, we found also that there is a very interesting part related to that in history. We have the Shell company in Iraq and in Egypt, which had film units, which were the, you know, breeding, how do you say, breeding spots for documentary filmmaker in these countries. And this has been very, very little research actually. And I tried to access them and they don't have anything in their archives about the different units, which I found amazing. So here, you know, there is like a dark spot in history as well, particularly as, you know, Salah al-Tuhami, for instance, in Egypt. And there's a whole bunch of people who came out from the Shell unit in Egypt, which later became really the leading documentary filmmakers of the post-colonial era. And this is interesting here. So it's not just about current, you know, about, you know, the Gulf. It's also about the other countries where we.
So
have.
what years are we talking about Shell in Egypt? What years would that be?
That's the early 50s. Early 50s.
Early 50s, okay.
They had even a journal. They had a journal. Yeah.
Wow.
And
I mean, and I think, I mean, in terms of gaps, I mean, Ali has pointed to, you have pointed to some, but also you mentioned at the beginning that the book Jordan and Sudan are only like referenced, and I find that strange for Jordan, given that, you know, they have a whole film commission and there's a lot of stimulus for local creatives and filmmaking. So I think, looking at the time, I think we are going to wrap up there and say thank you very, very much to the panelists and to for Alia stepping in at the last minute, and to Viola for actually creating this whole volume in the first place and undertaking what is absolutely mammoth work. I mean, 29 chapters and 29 authors and 29 different topics and the different, as you say, the different voices and approaches and methodologies. That is really wonderful, and I just hope you feel satisfied, you know, that the book is out there, and I think, and I hope it gets a very, very wide readership. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
And
you.
thank you to AUC for hosting.
Thank you.
Congratulations again, Mabruk.
So thank you, Alia. I would really would like to kind of say a big hello to all the authors who are not there today, and a big thank you to all of them, and of course to AUC Press actually, and to Laura Gribben, to the main editor, who really kind of suffered also a lot with us and through us. We are very happy to have this out here, and thanks really to everybody who contributed to this work. Thank you. And Naomi, again, thank you so much for moderating this.
Oh, thank you. And I'm really gratified that conference, because I always thought that conference should generate a book, but I didn't realize it would actually take 6 to 7 years for it to happen. That is wonderful. Very, very, very gratifying. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to say to our
everyone,
that this book discussion is recorded and will be posted on Facebook and YouTube. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the comment section, and we will make sure to send it to the authors and the panelists. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Khalid. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.